Greetings, this is Proof Ruby, a nostalgic Catholic, with another Isaac Asimov short story. Now, this particular zine, December 1957 fantasy and science fiction, does have Asimov's name on the cover, but it actually has an article, let's listen, an article by him about strontium-90, written back in the days when people were still discovering what radiation might do to the human body and trying to decide how dangerous it was. And let's just say he expresses some very real concerns at a time when a lot of that hasn't been settled down just yet, but it's definitely a concern. However, in here he also has, that's right there. I feel it in my bones. Okay, this is an article by Isaac Asimov. But what I'm going to talk about here today is a short story of his. It's called, insert Knob A in Hole B by Isaac Asimov, page 90. So that's all there is to that here. Let's take a look at 90. Now, it turns out there's a bit of a story. This blurb or variation of it also occurs where the story is collected in Nightfall and Other Stories. So it's basically the same account, maybe with an additional detail one way or the other. But basically what happens is, let's see here, it says, Isaac Asimov is, I warn you, flatly impossible. Associate professor at Boston U, he carries on a full-time academic career with all of the reading and writing of learned publications that entails. He also publishes frequent non-academic books of scientific popularization. As an author of fiction, he writes one long adult novel a year. This is 1950 when that's about how he's been doing it. Plus one juvenile novel by Paul French. Plus uncounted short stories and novelettes. So far, actually, I've counted them. It's quite a number, but more than 100 this far. Plus articles, plus Gilbertian verse. I'm not going to get into the verse. In addition to 2 full careers, both overcrowded, he finds time to be a husband, a father, a lusty public clown, second only to Robert Bloch as a toastmaster, and, as is only fitting for the creator of positronic robots, a living doll, the most warmly likable man in science fiction. Maybe that's one of the reasons I like him. He is kind of a nice guy. So man, mutant, alien, android, golem. Possibly there is some hint as to the nature of this being in the genesis of his newest story. At 8 o'clock in the evening of August 21, 1957, Isaac Asimov appeared on Boston's educational channel WGBH-TV as part of a panel discussing means of communicating science. His fellow panelists were John Hanson, a technical writer of directions for using machinery, and David O. Woodbury, author of such science fact books as Glass Giant of Calamar and Let Irma Do It. The latter suggested, as a gag, that Asimov should then and there write a story to illustrate his means of communication, now a built-in Asimov characteristic, a positronic specification, is the inability to turn down a challenge. So, starting completely from scratch with a new idea suggested by the evening's discussions, Asimov plunged straight ahead and, under TV cameras and lights, wrote a story and read it before the half-hour program ended at 8:30. And here it is, word for word, as it was written on television, even to the retention of its one grammatical error. So, when it gets collected in Nightfall, they say all this again. They even mention the one grammatical error is still retained. It also does add that before they went on the air, there was some conversation about some of this and some sort of a hint that he may be called upon to write a story. So he started thinking stuff along that lines in his head before. So it wasn't like just out of the blue somebody says, okay, can you write a story? And he just goes and does it. They had talked about it right before the show. If you want to call that cheating, still. And actually, as a short, this is not a bad story. I mean, thankfully, the possible double entendre you could read in the title has no relevance to the story. A good thing. Okay. So what do we got? Well, they're talking about instruction manuals. Now, this is kind of a pet peeve for a lot of people. You get this product, and it comes in the package, and there's all these pieces, and somewhere is this raggedy, scraggly piece of paper that tells you how to put it all together. And sometimes it's not too bad, and sometimes it's just you just want to shoot the guy who wrote this thing because he took the time to write something that's almost worthless, and you're just trying to figure out how this all works and try to put it all together and finding you still did some of it wrong and you got to go back and try it again. No, you can't use this screw. You have to use this other screw here. But all these different little things as you try to put something together. And then when you're all done, you may still have there's a few parts left over. I'm not sure what they're for. They might be just spare screws in case you lose one. Or they might be something you were supposed to use somewhere, and since you didn't, this could interfere with how well it all works. So you don't know. And let's see, they talk about here, they're weary of filtration units that clanked, hydroponic tubs that leaked, air generators that hummed constantly and stopped occasionally. So you kind of get the idea that because they're talking about, well, it's going into space like room for all this machinery is very much at a premium. And let's say you're sending up equipment to like a space station or something, or like a lunar colony or other planetary whatever, and you space inside the rocket ship is very much at a premium. So you got to dismantle everything and have all these parts, and then these parts arrive. And then somebody thinks of an idea that you could have a positronic robot. So this is, in fact, a positronic robot story that would be programmed with the knowledge of all the different kinds of things you could ever have to put together. Probably a lot more than it would ever meet up with. But at any rate, no matter what you stick in there, this robot will handle it. So it's a great idea. They send the robot along with everything else. What goes wrong, I'll leave to your imagination, or you can track the story down. In this magazine, it is a single page. It is therefore a very, very quick read. It's maybe just barely any shorter than A Woman's Heart, by the way. So, which covered 2 pages, although much of that was artwork and a blurb. Well, you could say this is 2 pages too, because you got a very long blurb, most of which I read, plus the story itself. It's on the 1 page. So I won't get further into it, but of all his short stories, I think this one rates very highly. It's a good short story, and even though the story is almost as short as the blurb it takes to describe what it's about and the context, it was worth including in Nightfall and Other Stories. So it's a genuine classic, and it does get into this whole thing about you need good instructions. You need to put as much time and effort into the documentation of a product as we do into the product itself. Something that, at least for myself personally, having seen the frustration and also having been on the other side of it. A little autobiographical. When I first hired on, one of the first things I had said about doing was trying to document a program which I really didn't know anything about, and now suddenly I'm trying to document it. And it was terrible, and I knew it was terrible, but what can I do? I don't understand. This is the people who write the program and know what they're doing should be the ones writing this stuff, not some outsider who comes along and may be intelligent. What can I do? And say, well, let's see, this module here looks like it's doing some sort of a matrix conversion here for some other purpose, and that's about what I put down for it. Not realizing that we're talking Earth models that can be rotated to different coordinate axis systems based on whether you're going to put it in the middle of the Earth or something that rotates with the Earth or something based on a spot on the Earth somewhere, etc., etc. And you want to convert one set of coordinates to another. That's what that really was about. But at the time I had to write this, I didn't have all that figured out. So one of the things I resolved very quickly after that was that when I'm doing any kind of program, which I quickly moved up to as quickly as possible, now I'm coming up with the programming. I know what this program does. And I would write it out very carefully. I would document what the modules are, what they're doing, what requirement they're meeting, you know, and most importantly, how they work, especially if there's anything about them that's kind of unusual or unexpected, which sometimes I did some very strange programming procedures that people have never seen before, because this is a real-time program. It has to go fast, blindingly fast, and you can't do a lot of the usual things that people would do in software when you don't care that much about speed. And we are, of course, looking at computers of the 1980s, which were nowhere near so fast as powerful as they are today. But I've noticed that new computers really aren't even as fast as they were then, because there's just so much inefficiency in the way they do software now. It's just unbelievable. At this time, I just go, let's cut through all of that. Let's just get the greatest potential directly out of the hardware. That worked well, but sometimes it made for things that required explanation. And I gave it that explanation. I just insisted on writing all of my own documentation, everything. The user manual, the product specification, the development specification, even the version description, the configuration management documents that tell us exactly what this is, where it is, and how you load it, everything. I wrote everything myself because I didn't want to have some other who knows who trying to second guess this stuff, and ending up, if they're lucky, even on par with what I was doing as a brand new hire. So, you got to be willing to do these things. You can't just put out some genius bit of code, throw it out there, and leave it to others to interpret or something. You really need to document the thing yourself. If it needs to be fixed, if it needs to be changed, or even just somebody looking at it going, what the heck is going on here? It's nice to have something handy that can tell you, here's what's going on, this and this and this and this. You go, wow, okay, that's clever, or it's not, or whatever you think of it. So, at any rate, instruction manuals, documentation, those are an important thing, and they managed to do a good little story based on that in just 300 and something words. I think they counted them. It was like just a very few words, one page. Well, anyway, it's a good story, and it's taken more time to talk about it again than it would have taken to read it, but that's not for me to do. So, thanks for listening.